Hi, I'm Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. I'm Greg Brahe. I am the host of Inspiring Honesty, and I just wanted to start off by saying how happy I am to be here. This is my first time doing this show, our first show. Today we're going to have Bob Greaves as our guest, and he'll be a regular guest, at least at the beginning of the show, to help us along. I don't know how many people have seen the previews for our show or any of the promotional material that we put out, but what I want to let everybody know about Inspiring Honesty is that it starts off with myself, an atheist, and a conversation that I had with Dr. Jones a while back that led to an open dialogue and opportunities for us to really dig deeper into questions and to put out honest answers. And it's been an opportunity to come together in a way that has never really happened before. So Dr. Jones approached me with this show, and I think it's a fantastic idea. This is, as far as we're aware, the first time that there has been an atheist representing any sort of questions or regular appearance on a Christian network. And to balance that out, because of course there's not any value to having a show that's just an atheist coming and saying all the things that I don't like, or the questions that I have, we're also going to have regular guests that represent a theist viewpoint. I guess from there, I did want to qualify a little bit, tell you a few things about myself before the show gets going. In the long run, is that I have been accused of generalizing, of using unjustified claims. And I'm going to do my best to avoid that in this case. But I want to, as a disclaimer, let our guests know that if I use a term such as people of faith or Christians, and it does not apply to your personal faith, I'm not using that in a generalized term. I'm using it as a way to reference the group of Christians that do hold that belief. It's not necessarily representative of everybody, but it is representative of some people within that faith, and that is what they call themselves. So I guess from there, I'd like to get started, and this is my first time hosting a show, and I'm really excited to do it, but it's all unscripted and off the cuff here. So I will introduce our guest, Bob Greaves, shortly, but before I get to that, I want to go over who I am a little bit, give the viewers an introduction to Greg Brahe and your first host to this show, hopefully the regular host. I am an atheist. That means I don't believe in any gods. It does not mean any specific god, generally. There's thousands of gods that have been believed in over time, and I do not accept that any one of them exists. That's linked in many ways to a lot of other parts of my persona. I'm a scientist and a skeptic. I look through evidence and through the logical reasons to support any opinion that I try to have, and I love to be challenged. I have been wrong. It's happened once or twice, I'm sure. But I challenge you to interact with us and to join the Ustream chats and to give us questions. We will be taking them throughout the shows and hopefully giving you both angles and multiple viewpoints on that subject. As far as what you can expect from me and what I'd like to see with this show is just an open and honest dialogue, asking the questions that have not been asked and getting all sides represented with it. I've not always been an atheist. I grew into that position after years of study, after growing up in a Christian home and studying through the rite of Catholic initiation for adults with a fantastic priest of a Norbertine order. And it's been an amazing journey for myself. I'm constantly reading and doing my best to stay on top of things, and I think this is going to be a fantastic opportunity to do more. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest, Bob Greaves. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you very much, Greg. It's great to be here and to have this chat with you.
So, Bob, the reason that, I'm excited to have you as our first guest is because you are to not to be too cliche here, you are a very unconventional person, which is the Unconventional Pastor, the show that Bob will be hosting immediately after this one. Uh, but your faith background is different than what most people could probably have. Is that accurate?
I think it'd be very accurate, and in fact, it would probably be even honest to say that you and I may have a great deal more in common than a lot of people of faith would expect.
That's a fantastic point. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your background, how you came to be in the position that you are today, and sort of how you would define what you do believe in a brief statement?
Oh, well, trying to be brief. Of course, you're talking to a preacher. That's a challenge. My faith really began more when I was a child. Was in the basement of an Episcopal church during the cold, cold winter in the hallway where we hang up our coats. And I was there with my family. There were, all told, 7 kids in that family. A ton of us there. And it was very cold. We're hanging up the coats. I'm just a little boy around the age of 6 or 7. And I noticed that one of the doors that I could lean against was very, very warm. And so I leaned against it, and I had an older sister who asked me if I knew why the door was warm. And I said, no. And she said, it's because they keep God there. And that fascinated me as a young kid. And that entire winter, I believed, as it were, that door was warm because God was in there. And I would just stand next to the door as often as I could just to be there. So that was my earliest recollection of being a person who basically had a very active faith, not just a belief in intellectually, but something that affected my behavior and my involvement. And I would have to say that has become for me in many ways even a metaphor that continues to this day.
So what was behind the door?
It was a furnace room.
Okay.
It was where the boiler was.
I heard that story.
But it nonetheless got me certainly thinking in that direction. And of course, the trip involved, in some ways, just a very generic view of a very generic God. And then by the time I was a teenager, I went into a very fundamentalist kind of view. But by the time I was, before I even reached 30, that was beginning to fall apart for me. And it was perhaps completely gone by the time I was 32, but I still remain a person of faith.
So when you say that you're a person of faith, it's a very broad spectrum answer, and that's when I mentioned earlier that I have been accused of generalization. Unfortunately, that comes from religious and I guess theological language. The fact that it's difficult, it's been used in so many different ways, and there's so many overlapping terms. Can you describe to me what you would say you have faith in today?
Well, I certainly have a faith in a variety of things. I have faith in me. I see myself as a competent creation of God, and so I feel through faith and not always being able to prove it that I'm a person adequate to life. I believe in a God. I don't believe that my faith is in a specific doctrine of that God, but I would classify myself as a Christian, definitely. But I do find that I perceive Christ in a far more generic way than the way he tends to be specifically described in most traditions.
That's interesting. It doesn't give us a whole lot of detail yet, but
no, it doesn't. Because I don't think it's really in the details. I think are perception, and the rest is I don't see that God is is someone that I can contain such an understanding of that I got him nailed, So the descriptions, the ideas, the concepts are perhaps useful, but I don't. That's not what my faith is in.
So why do you consider yourself a Christian and not simply, say, a deist?
Good question. In looking at the various different religious views, I have seen Christianity as possessing the potential for some unusual uniqueness that I think speaks to me as being more coherent. There again, of course, this is a matter of faith. I find it coherent. I don't find it so compelling that I feel I can require it of others, but it is sufficient for me to risk the idea that this is where I will invest myself. My own personal experience in doing that involves from my standpoint, the appearance of having encountered interaction, the presence of God, and I certainly fully acknowledge the possibility that that's just completely perceived, but I don't believe so. So there's a sense in which faith really defines it for me. I'm not sure that answers your question, but you asked specifically why Christianity. I do perceive the human race as struggling in a way that in some ways just doesn't make sense to me in terms of how can creatures of such dignity as we really do have be struggling so badly? What blinds us? What hurts us? Why are we struggling? And to see what role love plays in that has convinced me that that love makes a very real difference in our lives, and I see it as personified in the redemption that we find in the story of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Not necessarily in the traditions that followed thereafter, but in that history. And so that's where I am comfortable risking my faith.
So do you believe that Jesus Christ was a real person?
I believe he was a real person.
He did exist and walk the earth?
Yes, historical. Yes.
Okay. And do you believe that he was crucified in close to the way that it was described in the Bible?
Essentially, I believe he was murdered, yes. I hear no sound, so I'm wondering if I've lost a connection. But
hey guys, I'm going to jump in here right quick. I think we're having some network connectivity issues. This is Joey, the producer. Greg, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. You cut in here. We had previously talked about the goofy moments where the silly producer might come in and say something. So this is one of those moments.
Hi, Joey.
Hi. Okay, so it looks like.
No.
All right, guys. It looks like we're doing well now. So I'm just gonna fade out now and let you continue. Bob, you might want to repeat your last comment.
Did you hear what my last comment was, Greg?
The last I heard, you said that you do believe that Christ was murdered.
Right. Yeah. I see the idea that he who came to, in my estimation, to destroy religion, got in the way of the religious, and they certainly tried to make sure they could get him out of their way, and they did. So I see him as the victim of a conspiracy to get him out of the way.
Okay. And do you believe he was resurrected?
Absolutely.
In a miraculous way?
I believe he was raised from the dead, yes.
Okay. That helps, and that's one of the things I find it extremely important to define certain parts of people's faith, because, as I said, it's such a wide spectrum of what people could believe, and even people who consider themselves Christian don't necessarily.
We're all over the map, we're all over the map. I would be one of those who would perceive that the belief in the resurrection, as I understand it, is extremely key and central to the identity as a Christian. Yes.
So, if you believe that the resurrection is a essential quality to Christianity, what is it about that? Because I believe from our discussions in the past that you do not believe in the doctrine of hell. Is that correct?
Well, not in the traditional sense. No, I don't.
So, what was necessary for Christ's death and resurrection in that case?
I don't know that it was. I don't know that his death was at all necessary. I think that it was inevitable because I think that human nature was in such a low ebb at that time that
You
when
still
Christ
there?
would
I seem
come.
to have lost the audio on you.
Oh, sorry. I would say. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Uh, I don't think that his death was necessary as much as it was inevitable. The message that he would bring would be so hated by the powers that be that it was inevitable that they would eventually want to get rid of him. So I think his death was inevitable. And because his death was inevitable, his resurrection was necessary. But I don't perceive this as an atonement the way that most Christians do, in terms of Jesus died and his blood now makes God the Father happy and satisfied, and he no longer wants to kill us all. I rather see that as love having come to us in a person. We murdered him because we didn't want what he was going to do to our power struggles. He rises from the dead to say, there is nothing you can do to make me stop loving you. And so please come.
Okay. You know, that's an interesting understanding that I've not really heard it told that way
Yeah, that's
before.
that's why they call me the unconventional pastor. Now, even going back to hell, there's one of the main reasons I don't believe in hell is because when I look at the linguistic history of the word hell, it strikes me as a doctrine that was contrived by the church later on. Although the word Hades appears in the text, and the word Sheol and the word Gehenna, the story that has been told about this was more of, I believe, a Hellenized assumption of the Greek culture that Christianity then was to be developing itself in, so that by the time the church has been around for a number of years, people are assuming that the use of this word Hades was associated with the concept of Hades as was part of Greek mythology, and they just Christianized it.
Okay. That's so. I guess from here, I think I have an understanding of why you call yourself a Christian. That obviously makes a lot of sense. But one of the biggest questions that I think a lot of people of faith are not confronted with often is more basic than that, and that's actually probably the direction that I'll be going with the show in the next or the first few weeks, is focusing on the reasons that people give for believing in any God, for believing in the first place. So
let me encourage you. I hope you're very successful at doing a great deal of damage. And I mean that.
Thank you. So your reason, you mentioned earlier a personal experience that you had, and you did, I think, qualify and said that there was a chance that might have been perceptive only, if I remember hearing that correctly.
I know, I have a degree in human development, which included a study of psychology and all that, and I am very aware of the fact that there are ways of explaining this away. There's a spin that can be used to try to demand that this understanding is correct, and there's a spin that can be given that might demand that it not be. And I fully recognize that that the perception that I bring to it is one that a reasonable person could totally reject, and reasonably so.
Okay, I can understand that. So the God that you believe in is obviously the God of the Bible, to some extent. There's with a connection to Christ that has to be related. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is key. You said to some extent. I actually perceive a progressive revelation of God coming through the experience of what I would call the cult of Yahweh. That the God of the Old Testament is, in some sense, a very human God, and that I see the God of the universe deciding for the sake of establishing what he needs to establish for our sakes, taking on the mask and then demonstrating through the history of those people how that really won't work until finally the Messiah promised comes along and says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And I see here a radical contrast, and yet something that was foreshadowed through the interaction of this faith that was in many ways corrupted from the very beginning. So that's, you might say, there's a lot of Christians who, when they hear that, would gasp with utter horror. But, as I look at the Old Testament, I see enough serious problems in it that I cannot connect the Christ of the New Testament with Yahweh of the Old Testament in a perfect connection. It just does not work for me.
I can certainly agree there. And anybody, that's one of the best things. I think there's a quote out there. I don't remember who it's from, but it essentially says that one of the best ways to become an atheist is to read the Bible. And take it literally. It's a book that has some horrifying acts in it, and I think that you're right that when you talk about
let me share something with you that I think would probably even make a lot of sense to you. I grew up in a home where the level of emotional abuse and abandonment was very high, and the pain was great, and the damage to myself as a person, my sense of adequacy was also very great. And I certainly went through a process of turning God and the faith in God into a coping mechanism. And it became very much even incorporated into the serious issues I had to work with. And there came a day in my life when I realized that if I'm going to have faith in God that has any integrity, it can't be a faith that is a coping mechanism. And that's perhaps a big part of what led me on that unconventional route.
So you don't believe in hell?
No.
As a
not in the conventional way
chamber
of a place of eternal torment. No.
And you don't believe that the death of Christ was a redemptive action in any way. It was more of a show of love and a way that
and that's redemptive. That's redemptive. If, for example, I mean, if you and I were, buddies, we'd grown up together, and then we'd gone through a little bit of history together, and then there came this day when you're not sure what you're going to do with me, and you betray me, and yet through that betrayal, I overcome the betrayal, and I'm still reaching out to you. Whatever that experience may have been could be redemptive to you in terms of that, as well as very instrumental in getting you to rethink what it was that made the betrayal make so much sense in the first place. It could create a real paradigm shift in you. That would be a very redemptive part of your own character. So I see it as redemptive. I see it as essential in the Christian message, but I don't see it as an atonement. I don't see this as
redemptive. I mean, when you talk about redemption in the friendship, I mean, that certainly does redeem the relationship to some extent.
Right.
It may bring you back together and renew your friendship in many ways, but it's still it's a selfless act on your part to come back and to forgive in that respect. But it's not
bear the cost
magical.
of the event. Yes.
I'm
sorry, and you got cut off there. I may have cut you off. I couldn't hear what you asked. Then.
It's not magical. It's an act out of love. Is that basically we're on the same page with that? It's
I'd say it's not magical. However, as spiritual beings, there are some things that I might believe about our spirituality that might sound magical. However, there's a great deal in traditional Christianity that, to my way of thinking, is way too magical. I see it as being, there's a sense in which I would interpret the word miracles to be a very humanistic word, that in the sense if there are any miracles, they're really operating by laws of physics we're just not all that familiar with, and nothing contradicts reality. But I don't see the redemption as something where, presto changeo, suddenly, something different happened. But I do see the presence of the life of God within the believer as making a huge difference in a very inarticulate way.
Okay. Well, then, I'd like to shift gears a little bit now that I think we have a pretty good understanding of where you stand. And obviously that's going to come out more and more and more as we talk, but a good base. And here comes one of the questions that I think really is sort of always tentatively in the air when you have a discussion between somebody who believes in a God and somebody who doesn't. Um, what what do you think I'm missing out on as an atheist, somebody who doesn't have a belief that there is anything greater? What do you think I could benefit from having that belief?
I believe that what you're missing out on is something that I have no idea what that would be. I'd have to actually get to know you as a person and be in a place where I'd even earned the right to uh, diagnose how this may be. You may be doing so perfectly fine that that this isn't a need you're conscious of, or even in need of at this point in time. So I don't think that I could. Certainly couldn't answer the question definitively. I know for me it was a basis of being able to have that permission to truly love myself in a way that healed a lot of the scars from that abandonment that I experienced as a child. And it was an extremely solid experience for me, a very pervasive experience, one that reached all the way through me. That's what I needed. Other Christians that
You
I
said
know
that your
don't seem
faith
to
is
have my
not
experience.
a coping mechanism. It's more than that. It's more than getting past the ills of your childhood and coming to terms with things. But I mean, with that statement, it almost sounds like that's where it's all derived. Is there?
It was a healing, more of a healing. If you're maimed, if you've got a broken leg, you might need a crutch, but you don't want to make a crutch your lifestyle if your leg can heal. And I would say I was very much a dysfunctional person as a result of the experiences that I went through, but that the experience of being loved, of living loved, and of having a sense of being loved by even the creator of the universe was for me a redeeming experience. For me, by the way, I don't believe in this very common Christian view that I'm a piece of garbage disgusting to God, and so he has to somehow forgive all of my horridness so that I can just get by with his grace. No, it was for me a reaffirmation of my own dignity, and that's why when we earlier were talking, I said it's restored in me a belief in me. So that I'm free to be me, adequate to be me, and I see God as more a relationship.
Well, I understand where you're coming from, Bob. I do. I think it's a very common concept of God as a relationship. But as an atheist, as somebody who doesn't have that, it always seems, and I guess the question I was driving at when I said, what am I missing out on, is that it seems that everything that you're describing, the ability to have unconditional love, to accept the flaws that are part of me, and even the serenity prayer, accept the things I cannot change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, is the exact same things that I myself as an atheist look for. And I believe that I've been able to achieve things of that nature without having any sort of belief in a God or a supernatural entity, a supernatural creator or deity in any form. And I can't understand where yours is such an open faith. It's so I can't even come up with the right word for it. Your faith is so accepting, so universal that I can't even normally what I can do with somebody of faith and the things that drive some conversations is being able to come up with some questions that can make them think about what benefits are there to it, or what could I benefit from it. But yours, you're a conundrum here, Bob.
Yeah, right. Well, the benefits I think that many people we're all different people, and we all struggle in different ways, and the word benefit, any of the benefits that any of us could enjoy from anywhere, could probably be very different for each of us. Um, I I think that my concept of what I consider universal reconciliation um, is one where I don't perceive the urgency the way that most Christians do. And in fact, as even Jesus said, I came for the sinners. I came for for the sick. I came for, these are the people he came for. I don't think when he's saying that, he's saying, and I don't care about you other people.
Well, this is, I think, a fantastic. We had a viewer wrote in a question that I think this is a fantastic segue into that. You talked about universal reconciliation, the meaning in, I guess, my opinion. We haven't gotten into whether you believe in a heaven or an afterlife of any sort, but it means forgiveness and that nature. And somebody had written in with a question that says, "Why do people today kill people in the name of God?" And that, I think, is it's an appropriate question, and I think there's plenty of answers to it. I'd love to hear your opinion, but beyond that, I'd also like to ask, for the people that do things of that nature, for the people who kill people out of cruelty, malice, who do terrible, terrible, inhuman things, do you feel that universal reconciliation is still appropriate for those people, that there's a reason that they should be forgiven for such actions?
I don't know that I actually even phrase it that way. Is a reason needed? As long as it doesn't violate justice in the end, why not? But I do perceive. I think I perceive human dignity as being far more reaching and far more inarticulate. In some ways, even beyond our grasp at times. I have a hard time believing that that anyone is innately evil. I think people do a great deal of evil, and I think that religious people do a great deal of evil, and they do it very religiously. And I see religion more as a victim of that, as are the people they are violent with. But I can't remember where I was headed with that, but for some reason my mind drifted. I'm 60. What can I say? But
so for people that do really, was there someone else there?
Can't hear you. You were cutting in and out there for a second.
Okay. For people that do these, I mean, you talked about having universal justice in the long run, but say.
Okay, you kind of universal reconciliation.
Reconciliation, or there's any amount of forgiveness that can be justified for the actions of these people.
Well, where I was headed at now I remember. Yeah, is that I think that everybody behaves in a way that at some level they think they need to. And I think that everyone also behaves in a way at times at a level in which they know they shouldn't be behaving this way. And so we're in this conundrum of I'm in between a rock and a hard place of ways in which I know I ought to behave and yet ways in which I feel I have to or need to or should or and I think we all experience that conundrum, and I don't think we all handle it that well. And I think that sometimes the way we are violent toward each other actually does developmental damage to people, where you're not going to see them developing in a way that presents the kind of dignity and loving, awesome behavior that human beings can be capable of. And in many cases, the most evil among us, this is not necessarily something that is entirely their fault. I think they have to be held completely responsible for their behavior. I mean, as we become adults, we become adults, all of us, with a certain amount of baggage. Well, it's now your job to work that out. But I don't think it's anyone's fault that we find ourselves coming of age with all the baggage we inherited. That's, in many cases, stuff that's been pushed on us. I mean, think about it like a guy like Hitler. There's no excusing the evil that he committed. But I have a hard time believing that a human being could commit that evil simply because, well, they're just evil. They're just an evil person. I can't imagine the damage that must have been done to a guy like Hitler for the things he did to make so much sense to him that that's what he ought to do, and the lust for power that was behind it. But I do believe that a guy like I don't think a guy like Hitler can be forgiven by just by saying, "Hey, forget about it. Don't worry about it." No, I think he has to come to terms with it, be very honest about what he did, what it cost, how it hurt, and has to go through an experience of recognizing the sort of things that will bring about within him a very redemptive paradigm shift. I can see that as something that might be something similar to the idea that eventually became hell, you know, in Christian
It
doctrine.
almost sounds more like purgatory.
I think that's where purgatory really came from. It was a as the Christian church is developing its doctrine, it's kind of making stuff up as it goes along, and it's trying to figure out, well, what do you do about this, And purgatory, I think, was one of the options, and the Hellenistic view of Hades was another one, or hell, and I think that that in some traditions one won out and the other one didn't, and in some traditions they both won out, to purgatory for the faithful and hell for those who never, but all in all, I think a lot of it became extremely manipulative stuff, and so I just see that as part of the evil in the church. But anyway, getting back to the question of forgiveness. I do think that all people need to come to a point where they are willing to embrace the value of love and own their failures to have always embraced that, experience the process of going through the kind of developmental changes that requires, and I do see that as part of the redemption. And I don't see any human being there may be plenty of them who are beyond our skills and capabilities as human beings to kind of bring them back from the dark side. But I don't see that as being an eternal condition that God can't, in some way or another, eventually overcome.
I think that's a good point, a fantastic point. That there's so many different levels. I mean, the purgatory idea, the levels of understanding of what you can do, and I think the idea of understanding your own actions as punishment are it's sometimes the greatest punishment that we can have. But let me tell you a little bit about what, as an atheist, I can take from these situations. A little bit of comfort in knowing that when somebody dies, they're dead. Hitler, in my opinion, and in my understanding of the world, is dead. There's no chance for redemption for anybody of that nature, and it seems like a way to, I don't know. It's difficult to come together with that, because when you say that Hitler's dead, it also means that Mother Teresa is dead, or that
Sure.
people who have done Gandhi amazing, fantastic things are also not going to live on into the afterlife. And I can understand the comfort of the
Kind of
idea
sad,
that
isn't it?
when you die, there's going to be something more. But
and that includes you and I. There's going to be a day you and I will no longer be around.
Right,
Yeah.
and I have a hard time intellectually justifying the idea of living on after you die. It seems the kind of thing that it's, as you brought up before, a coping mechanism.
Oh, I certainly don't want it to be here.
Now you're a grown man. You have a little bit more life experience than I do, and I'm young enough to have thankfully not lost a lot of people in my life, but that doesn't mean I've been without that. And I've been to plenty of funerals and seen people crying and grasping at the opportunity to believe that this person is living on, and that their immortal soul has an opportunity to go to heaven. I've seen that cause some great grief as well. People who are worried that it won't go to heaven, and that this person or that person for one reason or
And
another is going to go
that's
on to a
almost
place of eternal torture.
That's
But
abusive torment in many ways. I mean, just to even be worried about that is.
but what evidence do you have that people live on after they die? Why should we believe that there's any place to go after?
Well, I would actually answer the short answer. There is no evidence, and there is no.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, but I would say this that and part of this might relate to. I think some religions actually grew out of overgrown explanations for near-death experience. I think that's where a lot of religion came from. But in my own near-death experience, there was a there was a consciousness that was beyond, and so the very fact that such an experience is possible gives to me permission to consider the possibilities, and to having considered them, to have embraced them. But I would certainly be one of those theists who would want to back off from the concept of compelling reason. And I couldn't ever, I'm not evangelistic in that way, so I.
But and this is what I'm going to keep coming back to here, Bob, is that you said that you don't like having religion as a coping mechanism, or faith as a coping mechanism. And I apologize, right. I do tend to use those terms interchangeably. But so far, the reasons that I've seen, yes, you had a near-death experience, and I would love to hear that story. But there's also, you've talked about the redemptive power of your childhood and the way that it helped heal you from some of the pains that you had. It seems to me that your faith is a way to help you deal with the bad things that happen in the world, and that would include death to some extent. Does that seem accurate?
I no, it doesn't to me. But then again, maybe I'm in denial. No, I know. I mean, if for example, I remember I was about 30 years old when I maybe a little young, maybe about 28, when I met a man who was an extremely gifted person in terms of he was working on a doctorate. He was a gifted philosopher, and his kindness in my life was a very positive experience. Now, I wouldn't call that a coping mechanism, but his presence in my life was a very positive experience, and I would see that as redemptive and what have you. And I think that all of the relationships that we have that are positive, that leave us feeling good about ourselves, that leave us feeling adequate to life, are in many ways developmentally nurturing. Now, I'll tell you this.
But doesn't the belief that there is something that you don't have proof for, whether it's the afterlife or the idea of a creator, a God who loves you and wants you to be happy and succeeds for you. I mean, you talk about this person who was actually there and you actually interacted with and had these personal experiences of kindness, and that's absolutely incredible, and it's wonderful. I've had things like that as well, but those things are verifiable. They've existed,
sure.
And
which is why I would
insist
that if you doubted that this other guy I met when I was 27 existed, I'd say, well, I'll introduce you to.
Right, yeah. I can't absolutely verify it.
But
we can go into the idea of.
I do have this ongoing experience where I mean, if I happen to be honest, I sense the presence of God in me, around me. It is almost a constant awareness that I can't even articulate. And it gives to me a great sense of everything's okay. Now, the reason I would say it's not a coping mechanism is because the redemptiveness that I've experienced in all this leaves me feeling adequate, so that I'm not worried about, well, what am I going to do if I can't find this, whatever. And what if I were to discover that, I don't know how we could prove that he doesn't exist either, but what if I were to discover he doesn't? Well, you know what? I feel very adequate as a human being. I could do that. I could deal with that. There's a sense here in which my relationship, as I understand it with God, is one I get to have, not one I feel like I need to have. And there's a difference in that. And I would say that even that has become for me in some ways a model for a lot of my relationships. My wife and I have been together for well over 20 years, and I think one of the strongest things about our relationship is that we get to have each other, but there's I don't think there's any way in which either of us relate to the other as like, oh, I need you. We enjoy each other's company. We enjoy the things we have learned in struggling through life together. And
I mean, I'm married as well, and I
Right.
am happily married. I have a wonderful wife and a beautiful a year-and-a-half-year-old son. I have a great friendships and family, and a lot of wonderful experiences of kindness. And I guess in my experience, when you talk about these, it sounds like you're describing all kinds of things that I also have.
Well,
And
that's
you and I
wonderful.
take different interpretations of that. And
Sure.
I don't understand where the justification comes, where
Well,
we
there
can.
isn't any justification, and there's no need for it. I mean, personally, I have no problem in understanding that there may be some people where the process of, like I say, I'm a universal reconciliationist. That means that I believe that all human beings will, at some point in the future, in this life or the life to come, make that connection. I mean, what if you were to be walking down the street and somebody introduces you to Joe Schmo, and you finally meet Joe Schmo, and oh, hi Joe, how you doing? And Joe and you have enough in common that you actually strike up a friendship. Are you open to that?
Sure.
Right. Yeah. Well, then, who knows? Maybe someday after death, you might find yourself in the presence of God, and he'll say, Greg, great job. You were awesome. And I
I got to tell you,
particularly
if I
like the
run into
fact
God
that you
after I
wouldn't
die,
give in to
if
things
I'm
that
wrong,
didn't make sense to you. That was awesome. I'm so proud of you. By the way, how do you do? I'm God. And your reaction could probably just be, no kidding. Well, that's awesome. How are you
I'll tell
doing?
you what, I'd be pretty angry. I'd have a bone to pick with this God.
Well, you know
If
what? I think
I
you
had
could deal with
came
it, right?
there,
Yeah, it's like,
and
why were you so hidden? But to
yeah,
be honest with
you'd
you,
think
you've seen
if
the
there
way
is this
religion has
deity, wouldn't
turned to
there
so much
be?
violence. Go ahead. I think we're talking over each other. What were you saying?
As a note to the viewers, Bob and I, we can't see each other today.
No.
We're working on that, and it's difficult because our microphones can cut out when the other person is talking. So if we do tend to be talking over each other, that's not intentional sometimes, but we're doing our best to avoid it.
Right.
But what I was about to say is when we talk about, I mean, first of all, if I do die and I meet this God, there's going to be some serious questions asked. Why did this God make itself so hidden? And I use the term, and I to
And I'll tell
qualify
you this: if
again.
he doesn't give you some really good answers, then you should stay angry.
Well, and what if it is? I mean, what if the God? Here's some text that came in from one of our viewers. It says that Jesus is the true God and Yahweh is an imposter God. That right there, it's almost a polytheistic statement that there's multiple gods, or multiple divine beings capable of competition. And if you read the Bible, it seems almost like Satan is nearly on par with God in power. And I mean, there's all kinds of arguments made for polytheism, but that's a discussion for a different day. That note right there. What if we get there and it turns out that Jesus was just a guy who had some fantastic ideas? I'll tell you, if some of the things that were quoted as or attributed to Jesus were actually said. I mean, his love thy neighbor as thyself is a fantastic way to live your life. And I think that's a wonderful idea. The concept of helping the sick, the needy, the poor, the hungry. he's a wonderful example in many ways.
The more
He's
generic
got
you
a
can make
against fig
Jesus in
trees,
terms
but
of character, I think the closer you get to a view of him. Um, that makes any
what
sense.
I'm getting at is this person they wrote in, if what if or that Jesus is the true God and Yahweh is an imposter God. But what if it's the other way around? What if you die and it turns out that Jesus was just a guy like you? I mean, you've rejected a lot of the concepts of faith, of religion, I should say, the things that have come from theologists and from the great thinkers of the past. They've made these decisions, they've written them down, they've interpreted, they've done whatever they've done, and you've said, no, I don't agree. I don't think
Right.
that's right.
Yeah.
And
What
you've come up
then?
with your own
Yeah.
interpretations. Maybe
Well,
Jesus I'm not going to deny that there possibly was a man named Jesus historically, but what if that was all just a guy who rejected a lot of the things that the religious teachers did, and there was no true resurrection? But the whole concept of it was Yahweh, the imposter God, according to the viewer, or the true God, the God of the Old Testament, is the real God. If
he's not
I'm
a
an
very nice
agnostic,
guy, and we're all in trouble if that's the truth. So I guess I'm in trouble. Um, Maybe I feel good enough about myself that I'd rather be in trouble than you know than with the God who thought that. Some of the things that are talked about in the Old Testament are just horrific ideas. And I'm not anticipating that would happen, but I for reasons why as a theist that doesn't disturb me is perhaps almost identical to the reasons why as an atheist you're not worried about it either, and that is. I can't conceive of a God where that which is unverifiable has any bearing on my eternal destiny. That's just not that doesn't make any sense to me. And although a lot of religion tries to bank on and control its followers that way, um, that's just some leverage that feels so much like manipulation to me that I don't want anything to do with it. So,
but it could be accurate, and that's we see if we don't have a way to verify it, there's no way to know. And as you point
that's
out,
right.
there's plenty of things that are not verifiable. So if
Right.
if it
That's why
turns
they
out
call it
any of
faith.
those things are true, then we're all in a world of hurt. So
Well,
you've made some assumptions as to what is true based on what makes sense to you, what feels comfortable.
well, definitely, there's no way for any of us to escape the integrity we owe ourselves to make sure that we can stand behind what it is we think and what we believe. And I think we need to take responsibility for that. And so I don't really see that as a problem. So that if a person wants to believe something and they can't take responsibility for believing it or being comfortable with it, I don't know that that's a healthy belief. There's a lot of people I think believe in God because they're afraid. I mean, what would happen to me if I didn't? Well, um, that's a almost that's a kidnapping kind of.
It
You're that to me can't. I reject that as even possessing philosophical viability. It just doesn't work for me.
I agree absolutely that can't be possible. And unfortunately, we need to wrap up here. We've got about a minute left on the show. This is going to be a fantastic starting point from next week. I think that we got through, and I appreciate all the viewers who stayed with us through the beginning. I mean, conversations like this sometimes take a little practice, and as I said, it's new to me to be hosting discussions like this in a forum for other people to talk, or for other people to view. And I would love to pick up this conversation where we left off next week, Bob, and I think we're now at the point where it's going to be a great show. So we'll be back together next Sunday at 6:00 for Inspiring Honesty. Did you have any closing remark you wanted to say? We've got probably about 30 seconds left.
No, I really appreciate your questions. I think they're very good, and I think they are to the point. And I appreciate the honesty and integrity you bring to it. So I think they found a great host for the show.
Thank you. I hope so. We'll find out in the future. Well, thank you, Bob. I look forward to more conversations with you, and hopefully together you and I can find some intellectual integrity and inspire some honesty through our crowd.
That's good.
Thank you, all the viewers, for joining us, and we'll see you next week.